for modern technology.
So this is the Mars rover. My grandparents got me this set. This took me about a month or a month and a half to build, I think. This is one of my favorite toys because you can do a lot of things with it. A lot of Lego sets. I have a lot of Lego sets, and a lot of them you can't really play with them. There's a lot of decoration, which is really good. But this one I love because you can turn the wheels. It turns the wheels so it can go side to side like this. Also, and then you can turn it back so it goes like this.
I think this is like a spring thing.
So this is the sling. You know, you do like this, this.
I don't know what it is. So this is a slinky. I know that for sure. Like this dude. Boing, 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 boing.
Well, this is the one slinky I ever seen. I don't have many, but
You can just turn it like that. Now I could go down there, and then both of it just comes down like that. Well, I know what it is, but I saw one on my tablet. I never saw one before in real life.
All right, good morning, everybody. I'm so glad that they got Legos in one of the videos because that was like my favorite childhood toy. So thanks to Elijah, wherever you are, for introducing us to your Mars rover Lego. But before we get started today, would you mind just praying with me real quick? Speak, O Lord, as we come to you to receive the food of your holy word. Take your truth and plant it deep in us. Shape and fashion us in your likeness, that the light of Christ might be seen today in our acts of love and our deeds of faith. Speak, O Lord, and fulfill in us all your purposes for your glory. Amen. All right, well, my name is Tucker Furr, and I'm the community pastor here, and I am honored to contribute to the conversation that we've just started about how the Bible can shape how we can wisely deal with the modern technology of our day. And so if you're new here, we just started a new series called New Toys, Old Stories, Ancient Wisdom for Modern Technology. And Pastor Anson did a great job kicking us off last week, and he introduced us to a lot of new toys that, to be honest with you, I had never heard of them. So I hope to introduce us to some new toys this morning as well that align with the passage we're going to be looking at. And I'm pretty sure you're going to be a little more familiar with the ones we'll talk about today. So let's start with what is called narrow artificial intelligence, or AI, or weak AI, as some people call it. Now, on the screen, you'll see images of the most common apps like ChatGPT, Copilot. Claude is another one that's gotten really popular. And one of the great benefits of the developments of AI is that it sparks curiosity in people to do things they may have otherwise not tried. And maybe some of you have experienced this. I know a lot of you in this room you play with this toy every day, okay? I recognize that. And so I wonder if any of this has happened to you. It's enabled people to build websites and even full-blown apps who've never learned how to code. They just type in some prompts and boom, AI spits it out. And this has been true for me personally. I've benefited from my own curiosity and using AI to kind of satisfy it. Haley and I were watching a Netflix show recently, and I remember the main character was an author. There was a lot of scenes where she was interacting with a publisher, and I've always been curious, like, how do people get into that line of work? Like, how do you become an author? What does the relationship with the publisher look like? And so I pulled out my phone after the episode was over, and I typed in this prompt on ChatGPT. I said, think like an author so you can help walk me through the process of writing a book. I want you to walk me through the process of writing a book from start to finish. Tell me exactly how you would go about writing a book for the first time. And then within seconds, it spits out everything I could ever need to know about writing a book, right? Now I read through it all and I get to the end of it and I was just like, oh, this is how you do it? I can do that. Like, that's not as bad as I thought it was. And for me, I never would have considered writing a book. I don't think of myself as a writer, frankly, because I didn't think I had the attention span for it. But what AI did is it broke it down into bite-sized chunks, and it gave me the confidence I need to get started. And so I'm happy to report to you, I'm in the process of writing my first book, all because of AI giving me the confidence to do it. So that's a pretty cool benefit of AI. AI can also do this. Look at that. It's a Stanley Cup right there. Come on. I will never set my fingers on a Stanley Cup, right? But AI can make it look like I just won it with my friend Cooper, you know? We're in Hilton Head, just hoisting the Stanley Cup. This is awesome, right? It's an amazing thing that AI can do. Another piece of what they call weak AI is our social media algorithms, which many of you use every day. The bright side of AI algorithms for social media is that you get to see a lot more of what you like and a lot less of what you don't care about, which can be very entertaining, right? The shadow side of that, however, is that social media algorithms are essentially digital attention hunters. Every click, like, and pause tells the algorithm what keeps our attention. Then it feeds us more of the same. The algorithm isn't asking what's good for you and I, it's asking what will keep you here. So these fancy new toys that many of you are so familiar with and make us feel all sorts of different emotions and raise a lot of questions, today it's raising one question, being, how does the Tower of Babel story help us gain wisdom for some of these new toys? So we're going to take a look at Genesis 11, which is where the Tower of Babel story is located, and it'll be on the screen. So let's start in verse 1. Now the whole world had one language and a common speech. As people moved eastward, they found a plain in Shinar and settled there. They said to each other, "Come, let's make bricks and bake them thoroughly." They used brick instead of stone and tar for mortar. Now let's just pause right there and let's look at a few things, okay? One important detail given is that they had one language and a common speech, which today in our world is really hard for us to wrap our brains around because, look, we live in a country that's referred to as the melting pot, right? We have people from all over the world move here who speak a number of different languages. Many of you probably work with people who speak different languages, and so it's hard for us to imagine a world where everyone spoke the same language, but that's what we're being told here. Another important detail given is that the people were moving eastward. Now, you may be asking yourself, why is that an important detail? It's just a directional word. And I'm glad you asked, because it gives us an excuse to go all the way back to the beginning of our Bibles on the very first page in Genesis chapter 1. And in verse 28, we're told, God blessed them and said to them, "Be fruitful and increase in number, fill the earth and subdue it. Rule over the fish in the sea and the birds in the sky and over every living creature that moves on the ground." Now, this verse in our Bibles is popularly known as the divine mandate or the creation mandate. Some even call it the cultural mandate. But for today's purposes, I'll refer to it as the divine mandate. And this is the purpose that God gave to humans after placing them in the garden. This is the responsibility that he gave them after they were created. And it includes three primary parts. Number one is to be fruitful and increase. In other words, create offspring. That's the number one thing God's telling humans to do, is to create offspring. Number two is to fill the earth and subdue it. So we'll take this in two parts. Fill the earth, just meaning expand out from the garden and carry God's blessing with them as they expand out. So they're sharing what God has blessed them with the rest of the world. So a lot of times we think that they were exiled from the garden and couldn't go back because of the fall, there is truth to that. But they were always meant to leave the garden. They were never meant to just stay there for forever. It was always meant to expand out to the rest of God's creation. The second piece of that is the word subdue, which is not a word we use much in language anymore. And subdue means more than dominate. It encompasses the idea of bringing potential into productive use through intentional work and creativity. Another way to think of it is as stewardship. So he tells them to steward what he has given them, these raw materials that he's created. And then last but not least, they were told to rule. Another meaning of the Hebrew word or phrase here is to care for. So this encompasses things like practicing justice and mercy, offering help and protection, and creating shalom, which is God's peace as a ruler. This is what we were called as humans to do as we interact and relate to the rest of creation. So this divine mandate also gets picked up and repeated in Genesis chapter 9 to Noah and his family after the flood narrative. And the story we're reading, the Tower of Babel, these are the direct descendants of Noah and his family. So they just heard this repeated to them a couple chapters before. So God clearly wants them to continue to carry this mandate out. Now, the reason that the detail in this story about them moving eastward is important is because it means that, at least for a moment, they were carrying out part of the divine mandate. They were filling the earth. They were expanding God's blessing out eastward. And they were subduing it. But then the second half of verse 2 shares another important detail. It says that they found a plain in Shinar and settled there. Man, they were doing so good, weren't they? Like, they started off strong, and then they pumped the brakes. And they decide to stop filling the earth and expanding God's blessing further and further eastward, and instead, they choose to settle in the plain of Shinar. And they just want to camp out there, put down some roots. But the good news is that they want to put their stewardship to work at least, and so they start getting creative. They said to each other, "Come, let's make bricks and bake them thoroughly." So they use brick instead of stone and tar for mortar. And this is an example of them carrying out that divine mandate once again. They're taking the potential of the raw materials God created, and they're using it productively through intentional work and creativity. So show of hands, do we have anybody in the room who works in the construction industry, past, present? Anybody? Okay, got a couple. All right. Even if you can just imagine our modern construction industry for a moment with me, okay? And think, what if you still had to stack stones that are all different sizes and shapes on top of each other to build things? What if the building we were sitting in right now was constructed with wacky stones? Could you imagine how long it would take to do something like that? The Furr Lake Norman project we're about to do, right? Could you imagine how long we would be in construction if you still had to do construction that way? So what we're getting at here is this advancement in construction technology of creating bricks that were all the same size and shape that stack really easily, and then using tar for mortar that makes them stick together and keeps water out. This was a significant advancement in construction technology for this time. And it paved the way for one of the greatest architectural feats in the history of mankind. Some might even consider it one of the 7 new wonders of the world. And yes, I'm obviously referring to Neyland Stadium, okay? Without the technology that we see in Genesis 11, we would not have this beautiful stadium by the Tennessee River that holds 102,000 of the loudest fans in college football and even does a pretty checkerboard thing every now and then, you know? That's awesome that we have the technology to be able to do things like this. So take that, Roman Colosseum. And you know what's funny is I've actually been to Egypt and seen the Great Pyramid in person, and I could have showed you pictures of that, but this is way better. So you get Neyland Stadium instead of the Great Pyramid of Giza. You're welcome. If only their creation of brick and mortar only led to good things like Neyland Stadium, we would have been in good shape. But unfortunately, the story continues. So in verse 4, we read, "Then they said, 'Come, let us build ourselves a city with a tower that reaches to the heavens so that we may make a name for ourselves. Otherwise, we will be scattered over the face of the whole earth.' But the Lord came down to see the city and the tower the people were building. And the Lord said, 'If as one people speaking the same language they have begun to do this, then nothing they plan to do will be impossible for them. Come, let us go down and confuse their language so they will not understand each other.'" And this is where things start to get bad again. They have now taken that divine mandate to rule in humility under God as their creator. And instead, they want to make a name for themselves. They want to use the authority and responsibility God's given them to elevate themselves to the place where God is. Instead of living as image bearers of God, they want to elevate their own image and the image of their tribe, their group, their people. And the tower that they were attempting to build was most likely a ziggurat, which you'll be able to see on the screen. These were fairly popular in the ancient world, and they were temples that were built to resemble a mountain. So another way you can interpret what's going on in the Tower of Babel story is that they were striving to build a mountain where heaven and earth would overlap. That sounds a lot like what Eden was created for. And so another way to think about what they're doing is they are trying to recreate their own Eden. So there's a couple things in this story that I think should sound a little familiar to us. First, when we talked earlier about AI, we spoke only of narrow AI or weak AI, which are the kinds of AI that we interact with almost exclusively at this point. John Lennox, who's a professor of mathematics at Oxford University, wrote a book called 2084 and the AI Revolution. And in it, he says, "On the more speculative side, however, there is considerable interest in the ambitious quest, the holy grail of computer science, to build systems that can replicate all that human intelligence can do and more. This is called general intelligence or strong AI. And some think that we will be able to create general AI that will surpass human intelligence within a relatively short time, certainly by 2084. He goes on to say, "Beyond AGI lies artificial superintelligence. Some hold that ASI or even AGI, if we ever get there, will function as a benevolent God." That sounds a lot like what they were trying to do with the Tower of Babel, does it not? In fact, in a podcast interview with John Lennox that aired recently, he pointed out that there are already groups currently that worship AI as a god, even though it is a human creation. And Lennox, I really enjoyed his book and appreciated it because he does such a good job of clarifying what AI truly is. He clarifies that AI is a simulation of human intelligence. It is not human intelligence. It simulates what you and I can do. So in other words, it acts like a human being. It does not think or feel like a human being. And if that is true, then why are people worshiping AI? Why are people saying AI could become a benevolent God in the very far off future? Well, what I think we see from the Tower of Babel story is that part of the human problem, the human condition, is that we want to be God. We want to be on the throne instead of ruling under his authority. So it could be possible, it's a potential in us that we may want to create human intelligence like God did, because we want to be in the place of God. Now, I must give the caveat that the majority of people developing AI and working in AI do not think this way. These are very small fringe sects that are kind of on this train. But I think even the fact that small fringe groups are talking about AI in this way should lead us to consider this very real human problem that we see in the Tower of Babel story. We want to be God instead of trusting and following him. That is a very real human problem. The second thing we see is that they wanted to elevate their own image and their own tribe, and they wanted to build this tower and this city to self-protect, right? They're going to erect these walls that keeps people out and keeps their own people in, and then they're going to build this tower and make a name for themselves. And this should sound pretty familiar to us because, like we mentioned earlier, the AI technology behind our social media algorithms is designed to do just that. They make it to where our social media pages can easily become echo chambers. One source put it this way: social media algorithms lead to division and tribal mentalities by prioritizing engagement, clicks, comments, and shares to maximize user attention and advertising revenue. This business model creates specific psychological and social dynamics that fragment public discourse. You see, algorithms award extreme emotive and controversial content, which creates a negativity bias on each of our social media feeds. And it pushes content that drives fear, anxiety, and anger because those types of posts have consistently proven to get more engagement than a more moderate, nuanced one. It also creates a confirmation bias when it shows us mainly things we already agree with. And we rarely see opposing perspectives unless we intentionally seek it out. This creates a distorted perception of reality, making our own beliefs feel like they're universally accepted by everybody. And because the algorithm thrives on conflict, we're often only connected with like-minded individuals on these platforms. And we're frequently fed content that mocks, exposes, or attacks the other side, which creates an us versus them mentality. And if I'm being honest with you, I grieve what I see the algorithms doing to our society, and I'm sure many of you do as well. It makes me scared to raise a kid in this world, and if you're here and you have kids, I imagine you feel that fear as well. And at a really basic human level, this is what they were doing in this passage. They want to elevate their own tribe above the rest and protect themselves from the outside world or the other groups. And this raises another core human problem, that we have a tendency to promote and protect ourselves at the expense of others. We have a tendency to promote and protect ourselves at the expense of others. And guys, it's just amazing that this story that was written thousands of years ago, okay, about a tower and city being constructed, speaks directly to the heart of what you and I are walking through today. Isn't that incredible? It addresses a topic that each of us in this room feels deeply. That's the beauty of God's word. And it doesn't just stop there. As they try to elevate themselves to where God is, we're told that God comes down to them. And he sees what is going on and he's like, okay, this definitely can't happen. If this is how they're going to choose to use the blessings and responsibility I've given them, then I've got to do something about this because I'm their creator. I know what they're capable of. So I'm going to do something. And what he decides to do is to confuse their language. And so that's the part of this story that most people remember. But the next part of the story is actually my favorite part. So in verses 8 through 9, we're told, "So the Lord scattered them from there over all the earth, and they stopped building the city. That is why it was called Babel, because there the Lord confused the language of the whole world. From there the Lord scattered them over the face of the whole earth." Did you catch what happened? Think back to Genesis 1:28. What was one of the core responsibilities God gave human beings? To fill the earth. And right here we're seeing that he, in his sovereignty, scatters them over the face of the whole earth, even though they were rebelling against the divine mandate. He still accomplishes his purposes, even though they rebelled. Because God is Lord and King over all creation, he looks at their decision to self-protect and elevate themselves, and he says, "Nice try. That's cute. But my purposes are going to prevail, and so I'm going to confuse your language, and you're going to be scattered over the whole earth like I wanted you to in the first place." The Lord intervened in his sovereignty to accomplish his purposes. And that is good news for the digital world we live in today. Because the developments of AI elicit a lot of different reactions. And I actually think those reactions fit in perfectly with the 4 R's that Anson gave us last week. So we're going to work through those one at a time. The first reaction I think we can have is that we can rely on it. And some people choose to rely on it in an unhealthy way, like we already saw, with no caution or boundaries, like the people who claim it will eventually be a benevolent God or the ones who worship it currently. But maybe more close to home, we often rely on it so much that we slowly erode our capacity to think and solve problems for ourselves. We just ask ChatGPT to do it all for us, and then we take what it says as Bible. That's not what AI is designed to do. And folks, the reality is AI is a good servant, but it is a terrible master. It's a terrible master. A second reaction we can have if we recognize that is that we can just completely reject it. Some of us reject AI out of fear that it is some sort of killer software and a robot that will spring to life and decide to murder the human race or otherwise ruin everything like you see in the movies, right? And look, I'll be honest with you. Some of the conversations about the developments in AI do truly scare me. There are some things that I'm fearful about. But again, this is where the story in Genesis 11 gives me hope. Because full rejection of brick and tar for them in that story would have been foolish. The problem wasn't that they invented brick and tar. The problem was they took it too far. They lost sight of who they were created to be as humans. They lost sight of the purpose that God had given them. And so we can use AI as a tool. It's not like it's a bad creation. We can use it as a tool. But we must keep in mind who we are as humans and what our purpose is in Christ. As we saw in the story today, we can have comfort and peace because God will accomplish his purposes, and AI will never get in the way of that. You and I don't know what the future of AI will look like, but we can trust God with the future of AI because he is the ruler of the world he created, not us, and certainly not AI. The third reaction I think we can have, and these last two are the ones I'm going to suggest we should have as Christians, is that we can redeem it. John Lennox, again, is helpful in his book, and he gives a great one-liner of what AI could be. He says it could be a way to make everything we care about better. A way to make everything we care about better. I talked to a chief information officer of a fairly large company who works very closely with the developments of AI, and I asked him, what's something you're hopeful about when it comes to AI? And he said his hope is that the developments in AI will ultimately draw out the things that are most human in us. Our creativity, the way we build relationships, have face-to-face conversations, and the way we love one another. We can redeem AI by using it to take care of things that keep us from doing what we're designed to be, which is heart, soul, mind, strength complexes that are designed for love. We can use AI to take care of mundane tasks and things that keep us from doing what we're created for, which is to love God and love one another. That, I think, is the hope for AI. That's the redemptive quality we as Christians should be bringing to the conversation. AI also presents an incredible opportunity for us as the church, because the question that AI consistently raises is, what does it truly mean to be human? And the reality is, guys, we have the best answer in the world. And that brings us to the next way we can react, is we can reflect on AI as a way of reflecting on the gospel of Jesus. AI should lead us to reflect on that question of what it means to be human. And when we turn to the scriptures for wisdom on that question, what you find is the good news of the gospel. That you and I were created by a loving God who made us in his image. He gave us a purpose and responsibility, and he told us to just trust that he's given us everything we need to live in his world. Yet, just like the people in Genesis 11, we wanted to be on the throne instead of God, and we wanted to define good and evil for ourselves. And so we failed the test in the garden, and throughout human history, including you and me, we have continued to fail the test and try and take the throne for ourselves. But because God is the ultimate ruler of the world he created, his purposes will prevail. So he chose to come down to us, similarly to how God came down to them as they were building the tower. He saw the innate human desire to bridge heaven and earth, and he closed the gap. He took on human flesh, and he introduced himself to the world as Jesus Christ. He was the king who came to spread his kingdom here on earth through a life of teaching, healing, miracles, forgiveness, and above all, love. He then humbled himself to the point of dying on a cross on our behalf. And his victory over Satan, death, and the powers of this world happened when he died, was buried, and was resurrected on the third day. And this provided freedom and forgiveness for all of us so that we could be restored to who we were created to be and to our purpose as human beings, which is to love God and love our neighbor. We worship Jesus because he is the God who descends when all of our human tower building fails. He's the one who comes down to us. We must reflect on that truth, that God's purposes will prevail. That is good news, friends. That is better than any news anyone can share about the developments of AI. If you're here this morning and you haven't trusted in the good news of Jesus, then I would invite you to do so today and discover what it means to be truly human. You can talk with myself. I'll be in the back during this last song, or any of the other pastors on staff. Or if you just have a trusted Christian friend, you can talk to them about it. Because the reality of following Jesus is you're not meant to do it alone. We need help in this journey. So please, if that's you, talk to somebody about your decision. And what I want to say to you is if that's you, you are welcome in this community of love. So all we do here, all we're doing as a church is we're trying to help each other do what we were created for. We're trying to help each other love God better. We're trying to help each other love each other better. And so I want you to know you have a place here, you can belong, and you can give and receive that help as part of this community. Maybe you're here and you've been following Jesus for a while, but you sense that there's an area of your life where you've been trying to take the throne away from God, or you're trying to exercise control in some area of your life, or maybe you realize that your algorithm has led you to falling into the trap of tribalism. And you've been sucked into the hatred and demonization of the other side, of other human beings made in the image of God. My invitation, if that is you, is to repent. Return to God and fall into his loving embrace, and you'll be met with love and mercy and grace. So as I close us in prayer, I want to encourage you, use this moment to take whichever step you feel the Spirit leading you to take. Let's pray. Father, I am thankful for the story we read today that reminds us that your purposes will prevail no matter what. Lord, I'm thankful that you are a God who comes down to us when all of our scheming to try and climb up to the throne fails. God, you rescue us, you redeem us, you set us free to serve you and to be who you created us to be. And Lord, I'm thankful that you have given us a purpose. I'm thankful that you are a loving God who invited us into that love. And that even though we fail time and time again, you take the responsibility for forming and shaping us into people of love by the power of your Spirit. And so, Lord, would you do that in this community? Would you empower us to love you more each and every day? Would you empower us to love one another so deeply in a way that says to the world outside that something different is happening here? There's a power at work in this community. And I pray that you would do these things for the sake of your glory, and that you would accomplish your purposes in each and every one of us.